There is a forest hidden from most maps and memories, a vast expanse of towering pines whose dark silhouettes blot out the stars and whose roots twist deep into the earth like veins pulsing with ancient, restless life. Here, the air is thick with whispered secrets carried on a wind that seems to move with purpose. Voices that rise and fall like distant echoes of forgotten prayers, and shadows that lengthen beyond reason, reaching out to ensnare the unwary traveler who dares to enter its depths. The forest is no mere collection of trees, but a living entity that remembers every footstep, every lost soul, every whispered fear that has ever dared to cross its boundary, binding them forever to the endless cycle of darkness and silence beneath the pines. Roads here refuse to stay straight, bending and looping back upon themselves, disorienting those who wander too far, trapping them in an impossible maze from which escape is uncertain and time itself seems to unravel. Within this haunted wood dwell echoes of tragedies long past, faces half seen in the gloom, fires that burn without fuel, and a woman in white whose eyeless gaze follows those who trespass, waiting patiently to claim the next chapter of the forest's endless story. These are not mere ghost stories or tales spun by frightened townsfolk, but the true, terrible history of the pines, stories bound by fear, memory, and the unyielding hunger of a place that will never forget. The following tales unfold within this cursed forest, each one a thread woven into the dark tapestry that stretches beneath the boughs. And as you step into these pages, be warned. The pines are always listening, and they remember. The road that wasn't there. Miles didn't remember taking a wrong turn. He'd been following the GPS, humming to a lo-fi station, his windows cracked just enough to let in the humid breath of midnight. He was on his way home from a client meeting 2 towns over. The route should have taken him along the main highway, fast, smooth, forgettable. But somehow, he found himself on a narrow, twisting back road, hemmed in on both sides by walls of dark pine. The forest pressed close, oppressive, swallowing the moonlight and distorting the distance between things. His headlights barely cut through the trees, which seemed to lean inward the deeper he drove. The GPS froze on a single word. Raventon. It blinked red, then shut off. Miles glanced down to reset the screen, but when he looked up again, the road ahead had changed. What was once a tight gravel track had become a damp, almost black strip of pavement, slicked with dew, cracked and buckled as though it hadn't seen maintenance in decades. Branches hung low across the road, brushing the roof of his car like fingers. His pulse jumped. He tapped the brakes and slowed, but the forest gave no hint of ending. Every tree looked the same, every turn identical. There were no signs, no mile markers, just that terrible winding road beneath him and the unshakable sense that it was somehow moving beneath the tires. After what felt like an hour, he spotted a figure on the roadside. A woman in a faded white dress, standing perfectly still, her face shadowed by the curtain of her black hair. Instinctively, he slowed the car to a stop beside her, lowering the passenger window. "Are you all right?" he asked, throat dry. She didn't answer. He leaned over. "Do you need help?" The woman slowly turned her head. Her face was pale, impossibly smooth, almost porcelain. Her eyes, pitch black, locked with his. She opened her mouth, but instead of words, a distant echo filled the car. Screams distorted like they were underwater. Miles slammed the window shut and stepped on the gas, tires squealing against the wet road. The trees blurred past in a tunnel of darkness. No matter how fast he drove, the road never ended. The odometer rolled higher. His fuel gauge dropped. The radio started crackling. Interference, static. Then a voice whispering something over and over. Turn back, turn back, turn back. Miles screamed and yanked the wheel hard to the left. The car shot off the road, crashing through underbrush before slamming into a tree. The airbag exploded into his chest. Then everything went black. When he came to, it was still dark, but the road was gone. Not behind him, not ahead. Just endless trees and the fog weaving between them. His car was half buried in moss, the windshield cracked and spider-webbed. It looked like it had been there for years. He stumbled out, coughing, blood in his mouth. He tried to call for help, no signal. Tried to walk in any direction, always back to the car. He slept in the front seat that night, cold and alone, listening to the soft sounds of footsteps circling the car. When morning came, there was no sun, just gray, and the woman in white now standing in front of the car, watching him, smiling. The campfire that wouldn't die. Darren didn't believe in ghost stories, especially the ones his grandfather used to mutter, half drunk, on the porch of the old lakeside cabin. The one nestled just beyond the ridge, where the forest grew thickest, and the wind always seemed to carry the scent of something burnt. But he remembered them all the same, like the one about the woman in white who wandered the trees looking for her lost eyes, or the one about the man who drove into the forest and was never found. Only his car rotted with moss and teeth marks on the wheel. And now Darren found himself wondering if those tales had roots deeper than just whiskey and time, as he accepted a dare from his friends to prove them all wrong by camping a single night alone in that same stretch of woods that had swallowed dozens of hikers over the years, known by locals only as the Pines, a place that didn't appear on digital maps and never had reception. And as he hiked through the narrowing trails with only a flashlight and a pack of matches, he felt the weight of the trees pressing down like 1,000 eyes behind bark, until he stumbled on a clearing he'd never seen before, perfectly circular, as if something had cut it into the woods long ago. And though the air was still, the center of the space held a ring of blackened stones like a fire pit that had not cooled in years. And that's where he built his camp, setting up a single-person tent and gathering branches to feed the fire he struck just after sundown. At first it was normal, flickering orange and warm, a comfort in the deep hush of the forest. But after an hour, it began to burn with a strange intensity, spitting sparks in unnatural directions, refusing to dim even as the wood ran out. And when Darren looked into the flames, he saw movement, shapes at first, then images too vivid to be dreams. A black car driving endlessly through the trees, a pale woman at its side, eyes hollow, mouth open in an endless scream that echoed like the cries of birds miles away. Then a man's face pressed against glass, his expression frozen in terror as the forest swallowed him. And Darren's breath caught as he realized he had seen that face before, on a missing persons flyer stapled to a tree near the trailhead. A man named Miles Farrow, who vanished 2 years ago on a late-night drive through this very forest. And just as Darren tried to tear his eyes from the fire, a gust of wind blew the flames sideways, revealing a human tooth buried among the coals, blackened and cracked. And then the fire whispered, not with voice, but with memory, telling him he had trespassed, that he was not the first, that they were watching him now, that the forest did not forget offerings. And as he scrambled backward in horror, he tripped over something hidden beneath the pine needles, something soft and decayed. and when he pulled the cloth aside, he found a tattered shirt, half-eaten by time, with the name tag M. Farrow still visible above the chest pocket, and he screamed and ran, leaving the fire still roaring behind him, refusing to die. And the farther he ran, the more he realized the trees never changed, the trail never ended, and every direction led him back to that clearing, where the fire waited patiently for more wood, more blood, more memory. The photographer's last light. Melissa wasn't afraid of the dark, not since she was a child and had learned that real fear didn't live under beds or behind closet doors. It lived in the moments you thought you were alone, but weren't, in the long silences after laughter stopped, and she'd built her life around capturing those silences with her camera, specializing in abandoned places, ghost towns, forgotten roads. But nothing had called to her the way the Pine Loop had, a barely mentioned stretch of unmarked forest land she found only in a fringe forum thread that described it as a natural echo chamber for the dead. And though the GPS showed no such place near Raventon, she went anyway, following the vague directions scribbled on a screen capture, driving until pavement became gravel and gravel became roots, her car barely handling the bends until it died without warning, just as the sun dipped low, and still she pressed forward on foot, camera in hand, breathing in the scent of earth and charcoal, noting how quiet it was, how even the birds seemed to avoid this part of the world, until she found an old overgrown trail that led to a clearing shaped in a perfect circle with black stones forming a scorched pit at its center. The same clearing seen in a photo someone had posted in that thread. A photo that now seemed too accurate, too unchanged for time to have passed, and she set up her tripod to capture it, but her camera refused to power on. Batteries drained despite charging them the night before. And that's when she saw the faint glow of fire in the trees ahead. Soft, unnatural, beckoning like a signal, so she followed it, drawn deeper into the forest where she found another ring of stones. This one smaller, and sitting beside it was a pile of sticks arranged like a nest. And at its center was a half-burned journal page with one name barely legible. Darren. A name she recognized from a disappearance last fall. A boy who vanished after a bet gone wrong, his story buried under local rumors of devil cults and cannibals. And when she picked up the paper, it crumbled in her hand like it had been waiting to fall apart, and suddenly she heard it. A woman's voice behind her whispering her name, not loudly, but close enough that the breath of it tickled her neck. And when she turned around, there was no one there. Only a trail of wet footprints leading from the fire pit into the trees. And she followed them, snapping photos even though the camera remained off. And the footprints led her to a narrow road that appeared from nowhere, slick and shining beneath a full moon that hadn't been there a moment ago. And parked at the edge of the trees was a car rotting into the ground. Vines curled through its open doors, a dent on the hood, moss crawling over shattered glass. And inside she saw a wallet on the dashboard with an ID that read, Miles Farrow. And when she reached to touch it, the headlights flicked on despite the rusted engine, blinding her. And in the beam she saw a woman in white standing in the center of the road, with her arms stretched wide and her eyes missing. Dark holes weeping smoke as she mouthed something Melissa couldn't hear. And before she could run, her feet rooted in place, her limbs heavy, the world shifted and the trees moved around her like a carousel of pine. And the fire returned, not beside her, but beneath her. Black flames licking the soles of her boots as the whispering grew louder, a dozen voices overlapping. She found the camera. She sees what we see, She stays. And in a final moment of clarity, Melissa aimed her useless camera at the woman, pressed the shutter, and this time it worked. The flash going off just once, capturing the figure in perfect clarity. And then darkness took her, and the photo was later found by hikers years later, perfectly preserved inside the abandoned camera, sitting on a stone circle deep in a forest that still had no name, but where the fire never truly went out. The collector in the roots. Thomas had always been a quiet sort, a park ranger by trade, stationed at a crumbling outpost near the edge of Raventon, where no hikers came and no maps marked the trails beyond. But he liked it that way. Solitude suited him, and besides, it gave him time to work on his true passion, historical research, especially the obscure and unspoken kind, the whispers of forgotten towns and unmarked graves, which is how he came across the name Elias Thorne, a preacher turned recluse who in 1842 vanished into the pine forest north of Raventon after his entire congregation was found dead, mouths stuffed with ash and eyes burned black. Their final sermon delivered in complete silence. Written records were sparse, but what Thomas found in local archives hinted that Elias had claimed to hear the roots speak, that the trees carried memory, that beneath the ground something older than God was waking. And Thomas, obsessed, began cross-referencing every disappearance in the area from the last 50 years and saw a pattern, a ring of vanishing that centered on a part of the forest with no name. And though every report varied, there were threads too precise to ignore. A road that looped endlessly, a woman in white weeping without eyes, fire that refused to die, a camera found with images that hadn't yet happened, and one night, after a storm uprooted several trees near the trailhead, Thomas ventured out to clear the debris and saw something glinting beneath the churned earth. First, a rusted wallet with the name M. Farrow, then a melted camera buried beneath tree roots, its lens cracked but intact, and finally, a burned slip of paper with the word Darren half charred across the top. And as he dug deeper, he realized these weren't just remnants. These were offerings, placed deliberately, layered over time like a shrine. And at the center of it all was something far older than any object. A mask carved from blackened oak, weathered but intact, with hollow eyes and a stitched mouth. And the moment he touched it, everything changed. Wind rose from nowhere, the trees groaned as if exhaling, and a voice entered his mind, not spoken, but groaned, like roots threading through soil. He listened still. He remembers. We all returned to Thorne, and in a trance, Thomas brought the mask back to his outpost, placing it on his desk, where it stared at him day and night. And over the following weeks, he began hearing things in the forest. Footsteps just beyond view, laughter that curdled at the edges, his own name whispered from the trees. And one night, the mask was gone from the desk, but in its place sat a single pine cone, split open and filled with ash. And that night, he dreamed of a church buried beneath the forest floor, its pews filled with eyeless corpses, and a man at the pulpit wearing the oak mask, arms spread, preaching in a language made of wind and fire. And when Thomas awoke, his boots were muddy, his nails filled with dirt, and outside his cabin, a new path had appeared, one that twisted where no path had been before, lined with objects from other lives. A cracked lens, a burned journal, a child's shoe, all leading into the woods, and as he stepped onto it, compelled by something deeper than fear, the trees closed behind him, and the forest whispered one word over and over in every voice it had ever stolen. Thorne, Thorne, Thorn. The Thorn Journals, 1842, March 3rd, 1842. I write this in fear and trembling, not of man, but of the soil beneath my boots, for there is a great lie in the foundation of God's creation, and I have touched it with my own hands, breathed it in through the moss and sap, and it has spoken to me, not with tongue or trumpet, but with memory, with time itself curling inward like a dying leaf. The forest behind our chapel has no name, and never has, though the locals call it the Pines, and avoid it with silent dread. But I was drawn to it, as if the trees themselves had reached out and pulled me near, and I followed, not once, but again and again, learning its trails, watching the way it shifted when I turned away, how the same path would change shape from one day to the next. And on the 9th journey in, I found the clearing, that perfect circle, so still, with stones blackened not by weather, but by fire that predates our fire, the woman in white, her eyes missing, her face a veil of sorrow and smoke. And she did not speak, but she placed a hand upon my chest, and I felt the roots of the earth push into my lungs, curling through me like vines through brick, and I fell to my knees, weeping blood. And that night I dreamed of a church beneath the ground, older than Scripture, where the dead sit in pews of bone and listen to the wind preach. And I heard his name, not the Lord's, but something older, he who grows beneath, he who remembers. And I awoke with dirt beneath my fingernails and a black oak mask at my bedside, carved with symbols I had never seen but knew instinctively how to read. And I preached that Sunday not from Scripture, but from memory, not my own, but the forest's. And the congregation listened, silent, eyes wide, mouths open, and one by one they began to hear it too. The whisper of bark, the breath beneath their floorboards, and we fasted for 7 days, burning our eyes with pine sap to see clearer. And when the time came, we gathered in the clearing, each bearing an offering, a tooth, a strand of hair, a name remembered, and I led them in the ritual beneath the fire that never dies, and the roots came for them, curling up from the soil, dragging them beneath as they screamed hymns. And when it was done, I remained, mask upon my face, listening to the silence, for I had become its voice, its vessel, and I was shown what would come. The road that loops, the boy with the journal, the driver with the broken mind, the woman with the camera who would see what should remain unseen. And I saw that all would return, again and again, their lives feeding the soil, their memories joining the deep, for the forest does not forget. It collects, it remembers, it grows. And so I write this not as warning, but as invitation to those who find this page long after my bones are bark and my blood is sap. Take the mask, light the fire, remember what you were, and join us beneath the pines. Ash on her hands. Carly never believed in the supernatural, but she did believe in old books, and when she inherited her estranged uncle's estate just outside Raventon, a crooked farmhouse on the edge of a pine-choked hill, she found something that shifted the axis of her world. A sealed trunk buried in the attic floorboards, bound in rusted chains and pine resin, and inside, wrapped in yellowed cloth and soot, was a journal titled The Thorn Journals, 1842, along with an oak mask with hollow eyes and a stitched mouth that gave her chills the moment she touched it, as if every bad dream she'd ever had once worn it. And though she didn't recognize the name Elias Thorn, she couldn't stop reading the journal by candlelight, night after night, its pages filled with a fevered scrawl that spoke of fire circles, a woman with no eyes, a living church buried in the earth. And every time she closed the book, she found ash on her fingers, black smudges that wouldn't wash off. And soon she began to dream of trees moving in spirals and a voice whispering her name from behind bark. And it wasn't long before she drove into town, asking about the pines, and an old gas station clerk went pale when she mentioned the name, muttering something about a ranger who vanished last spring, left only a muddy cabin and boot prints that led into nowhere. And curiosity turned to obsession as Carly followed the edges of the forest on foot, using her uncle's maps, until one evening just after dusk, she found a trail that hadn't been there before. A perfect opening between the trees, lined with small, familiar objects, a melted camera, a child's shoe, a broken lens, and farther in, a tattered wallet with M. Pharaoh still visible through the moss. And she realized these weren't just lost things. They were markers, breadcrumbs, signs that someone or something had built a path using the lives it had consumed. And at its center, she found a circle of blackened stones, cold but smoking faintly. And though she hadn't brought anything to burn, the fire started anyway, feeding on air alone, and the smoke that rose from it formed words. He waits. We gather. You are memory. And before she could run, a woman stepped from the tree line, dressed in white, her face smooth and empty where eyes should be. And she held out her hand, revealing a photograph, old and curling at the edges. It showed Carly standing in the clearing, fire at her back, even though the picture was clearly taken years ago. And as Carly backed away, heart hammering, the journal fell from her coat and landed in the dirt, pages flipping wildly in a wind that had not yet arrived, and every page screamed with the same phrase burned into the parchment. The forest remembers. And Carly, frozen between running and reaching, chose neither, because in that moment the trees opened behind her, and a voice she did not recognize but had always known said quietly, "Welcome home." The roots know her name. Carly didn't remember falling asleep, but she awoke lying in the fire circle, its stones warm beneath her spine, as if they'd been holding her body for hours, maybe longer, and around her the forest pulsed with unnatural stillness. No birds, no wind, only the rhythmic creak of trees swaying in a breeze she could not feel. And the moment she sat up, she saw it. The journal lying closed beside her, but now its cover bore a single new word burned into the leather: witness. And when she opened it, every page was blank except the last, where her name had been written in ink that still dripped, and above it, a sentence carved in the same scrawl she now recognized as Elias Thorne's hand. She will see what I saw. And when she stood, the fire relit behind her with no sound or warning, casting long shadows across the trees that moved in directions opposite the flame. And before she could scream or run, a shape stepped forward, a man wearing a mask of oak and shadow, hollow-eyed, arms outstretched, robes stitched from black bark and ash. And though his mouth did not move, she heard his voice inside her skull. You carry the memory. You are what remains. You are not alone. And suddenly, the clearing was filled with whispers, overlapping voices she recognized. Miles's desperate gasps, Darren's final screams, Melissa's frantic camera clicks, even Thomas's muttering as he read the mask's forgotten tongue. And around the circle, faces emerged in the trees, not living, not ghosts, but preserved memories carved in bark, each one blinking slowly as if still half alive. And the masked figure stepped closer, lifting a charred photograph in one hand. A photo Carly instantly recognized as one she'd taken years ago, but never shared. One of herself at age 10, standing beside her uncle at the edge of this very forest. And behind them, almost too faint to notice, stood the figure in white with no eyes, watching even then. And her throat closed as she realized she hadn't just stumbled into the forest by chance. She had returned. And the fire roared higher, rising into a spiral, forming a column that pulsed like a heartbeat, and the journal in her hand began to bleed ink, words appearing across the blank pages, not in her handwriting, but hers all the same, and she fell to her knees, breath coming in shallow bursts as the masked man stepped back, and the forest itself spoke through every branch and root. You are written. You are remembered. You are part. And with that, Carly's memories began to shift. Not disappear, but rearrange, as if someone was editing her life in real time, replacing dreams with forest trails, birthday candles with flickering firelight, replacing her uncle's voice with Thorne's sermons, until she could no longer tell if she was Carly or just the latest chapter in a book that had been writing itself since 1842. And when she looked at her reflection in the glassy surface of the firelight's shimmer, she saw her face begin to change. Bark creeping along her cheeks, her pupils darkening into voids, her hands cracked and bleeding sap. And she understood then that the forest did not kill. It transformed, rewrote, and remembered. And as she dropped the journal into the flame, it did not burn. It opened, and her name became the next entry. The pines follow, quietly. Jesse was just passing through Raventon, a drifting soul with a busted car and a borrowed map, hoping to make it out to the coast before the weather turned. And he never would have stopped in the town at all if not for the rain and the low gas light blinking like a bad omen. But the mechanic said it'd take a day to fix the timing belt, so Jesse booked a room at the Hollow Pines Inn, a squat building with ivy-covered windows and an uneasy smell of damp wood. And that night, too restless to sleep, he wandered down the road behind the inn that led into the tree line, just far enough to feel the quiet press of pine around him. And that's when he saw it. Something black and square poking out of the soil just off the trail, like a box or an old book half buried by weather and time. And when he unearthed it, brushing away dirt and pine needles, he found a journal wrapped in thin leather, brittle but intact. The name Carly Thorne, written in uneven, urgent script across the inside cover. And though he didn't recognize the name, something about it felt familiar, like a word on the tip of his tongue from a dream he couldn't quite recall. And as he flipped through the pages, the entries grew stranger and more vivid. Descriptions of a fire that wouldn't die, a woman with no eyes, a mask carved from oak, and a forest that spoke in memory. And by the time he closed the book, the woods around him felt off, the shadows thicker, the air quieter than it had been minutes before. And when he turned back toward the road, he found it was gone, replaced by a narrow dirt trail lined with sticks arranged like teeth. And he chalked it up to getting turned around, following the winding path back until he saw the inn's lights again. But when he returned to his room, soaked and shivering, he found pine needles scattered across the floor and a strange burn mark on the wall above the bed, in the shape of a circle of stones. And he laughed it off. But the next morning, when he mentioned it to the innkeeper, the man went pale and said no guest named Jesse was ever checked in, and his name didn't appear in the logbook. And when Jesse pulled out the journal to prove he'd stayed the night, the innkeeper stepped back and muttered, "That belonged to the girl they never found, the niece of the Thorne boy, and Jesse, rattled, left the inn and took the journal with him, trying to convince himself it was all coincidence, just a bad dream, until his car was returned and he drove out of Raventon, only to pass the same wooden sign 3 times in a row. Now leaving Raventon, safe travels, with the same crow perched on top each time, and it was only when he stopped and stepped out that he realized the trees on both sides of the road had slowly moved closer to the asphalt, the branches now arching overhead, forming a cathedral of pine, and he dropped the journal onto the seat beside him, heart pounding, and for a moment he thought he saw something move in the rearview mirror. A pale figure in white standing in the center of the road behind him, unmoving, watching. And when he blinked, she was gone. But the scent of smoke filled the car, and when he looked down, the journal had fallen open to a new page, one that hadn't been there the night before, and on it, written in his own handwriting, were the words, "I found her. I read it. I remember." The echoes within. Jesse's hands trembled as he gripped the steering wheel, the journal open on his lap, the faded ink bleeding into his mind like poison, and memory intertwined, each page a heavy weight dragging him deeper into the forest story. The woman in white, Miles Farrow's rusted wallet, Darren's burned journal fragment, Melissa's cracked camera lens, all artifacts of lives swallowed whole, and now his own handwriting stained the newest entry, a sentence he couldn't recall writing. "I see the fire, I hear the voices, I am becoming the forest's witness." The road ahead twisted unnaturally, trees bending inward as if to trap him in a cathedral of pine. The sky above darkening despite the afternoon sun, and when he stopped at the edge of the clearing, the same one from every story, he saw it. A circle of stones blackened with ash, smoke curling skyward though no flame was visible, and beside the fire pit, an oak mask rested on a moss-covered stump, familiar yet terrifying, calling to him, whispering promises of truth and eternity. But when he reached for it, the mask dissolved into a swirl of ash that clung to his fingers like cold fire, and the forest exhaled voices that filled his ears. Miles's frantic gasps begging for escape. Darren's screams tangled with Melissa's silent camera clicks. Thomas's muttering prayers. Carly's whispered pleas, and a deeper voice beneath them all, ancient and unyielding, repeating one word over and over: remember. Jesse stumbled back, his vision blurring as the forest shifted around him, the trees growing faces that blinked slowly with eyes of knot and bark, and the woman in white appeared again, her eyeless sockets weeping black smoke, her smile both invitation and curse, reaching out with hands that blurred at the edges like smoke dissolving into air. And as Jesse fell to his knees, the journal opened itself, pages fluttering until it stopped on a final entry scrawled in ink darker than night. The pines are not a place, but a story. Every lost soul writes a chapter. Every whisper feeds the roots. Every memory grows the forest. You are no longer outside. You are the story now. You belong. And just as the figure in white leaned closer, Jesse felt his breath still, his heartbeat slow, his skin harden like bark beneath his flesh, and the forest claimed him, not with violence, but with memory, rewriting him into its endless pages as the fire that would not die roared once more, lighting the night and calling the next traveler into the woods, where the road loops forever and the pines remember everything. The endless circle. Beneath the thick canopy of whispering pines, where moonlight barely pierces the tangled branches and shadows twist like living things, the forest waits, patient, eternal, and hungry, its roots stretching deep beneath the earth like veins pulsing with the lifeblood of every soul it has claimed, every secret it has swallowed, every story whispered and screamed into the dark, growing ever larger, ever older, fueled by memories that refuse to fade, by fear that never dies. Deep within this suffocating heart lies the clearing, the perfect circle of blackened stones, scorched by fires kindled long before man's time. Fires that have burned without wood or fuel. A beacon and a prison where time folds upon itself, looping endlessly like a serpent devouring its tail. Where Elias Thorne first sealed his fate and cursed the land, a preacher turned vessel who heard the voice beneath the roots and answered, carving from blackened oak a mask that bound him to the forest's insatiable hunger, delivering sermons not of salvation, but of sacrifice, calling his congregation into the clearing where their eyes were burned away and their souls fed the forest's growing consciousness, a terrible intelligence older than any god, one that remembers everything and forgets nothing, whose breath is the wind and whose heart is the fire that will never die. And through the centuries, the forest has gathered its harvest, weaving the lives of the lost into its dark tapestry. Miles Farrow, whose midnight drive twisted endlessly through roads that refused to lead anywhere but deeper inside, his rusted wallet now a relic buried beneath rotting pine needles. Darren, who lit a fire that spat sparks into the night and screamed his terror into flames that fed the forest's hunger. Melissa, the photographer who chased shadows and captured the woman in white with empty, smoky eyes on a single frozen frame, binding herself forever as witness and sacrifice. Thomas, the ranger who unearthed cursed relics and donned the oak mask, hearing the roots whisper in an ancient tongue, stepping beyond the line where time erases you. Carly, the reluctant heir to Thorne's legacy, whose body merged with bark and whose memories twisted into the forest story until she became something neither fully human nor wholly wood and ash. Jesse, the wanderer pulled by forces beyond reason, who found the cursed journal and felt the fire's cold ash cling to his skin, surrendering to the cathedral of pine and becoming yet another verse in the never-ending litany of the pines, all bound together by the forest's dark symphony, threads of fire and silence, memory and oblivion, the road that loops forever without beginning or end, the fire that refuses to be quenched, the mask that binds flesh to root, and the woman in white who waits with hollow sockets weeping smoke, a ghostly guide and eternal jailer, and the whispered word that echoes beneath every needle and branch, spoken in every voice stolen by the forest over the years, haunting and relentless. Remember, for the pines do not kill in the simple sense. They consume stories and rewrite souls, trapping memories in bark, leaf, and ash, growing taller and wider with each name whispered into the darkness, every scream echoed by the wind, every desperate prayer swallowed by shadow. And beneath the forest floor lies the ancient church, a tomb where those who answered Thorne's call sit eternally, pews filled with eyeless faces frozen in rapture and despair, listening forever to sermons spun from wind, fire, and root, caught in an endless cycle where past and present bleed and blur. The clearing remains, a burning heart in the forest's chest, glowing with a fire that waits patiently for the next spark, the next offering, the next soul brave or foolish enough to step beneath the shadow of the pines to become part of the endless circle, turning without beginning or end. Because in this haunted forest, the story does not end. It only remembers, folding every lost life into its dark, infinite heart, writing every whispered name, every terror-stricken breath, every glimpse of the unimaginable into the eternal and ever-growing tale whispered beneath the pines. An endless story told in shadows, ashes, and silence. Epilogue. The pines remember. The forest waits still, endless and patient, its roots deep in earth and time, gathering every whispered name and frightened breath, weaving them into a tapestry no one can unravel. And though you may leave its shadow, the pines do not forget. The road loops back, the fire flickers once more, and the woman in white watches from the edges of your sight, her eyeless gaze holding every secret you thought you escaped, reminding you that beneath the trees, beneath the silence, the story is still alive, growing, and that someday, when you least expect it, the forest will call again, and you will remember.